there.
Hey there.
Hey there.
You are the stars in your eyes.
And Mercury is not retrograde as far as I can tell, is it? But we've been having lots of issues with
It's just the moon.
yeah, just the moon, I don't know.
But Mercury was in retrograde while we were moving, so it's
Okay.
only the after.
You know, I'll tell you an amazing thing. When I was going through, like a series of emails from back in back in 2018, and I have my teacher, my astrology teacher, John Marcusella, and I were going back and forth about something, and then I went to meet with him before we bought the building across the street, and he said to me, that was it. I told him what we were gonna do. We were about to put down a huge down payment on the building across the street, and then we're gonna have to spend about 10 months trying to buy the building. We put 600,000 down. We're gonna have to find 8.4 million to close on the building. And he was giving me advice. I like the Reagans. I also have my own astrologer, like Nancy Reagan, and that was it. 2 months later, we actually put the money down and we signed the contract. And then 2 months later, he was checking in. He said, "What happened?" And I wrote back to him. I said, "We just signed the contract 2 days ago." And he said, "I don't want to make you nervous, but like when you signed the contract, Mercury was retrograde." And he said, "I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but just be sure you know that it's going to wind up being reversed at some point."
Oh my God.
So I was looking at that last week after we sold, after we sold the building a couple of months ago, and I said, "Okay, that's not a proof that astrology works, but it was something. It got the hair on my neck." Okay, anecdotal. Okay, let's look at this morning. Good morning, everybody. We're in a narrow place here, these narrow tables. Can everybody see us? Yeah, can you hear me well? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, I could hear good, and people are giving a thumbs up, so that's a good thing. Yeah.
That's a good thing. Okay. We're gonna figure this thing out, about the whole, the way that the situation, because I want maximal visibility for the people in the room and also maximal visibility for people at home. But for now, this is what we got until we tinker. If you're here for the first time from Israel, we welcome you. and if you're here for the first time in general, we welcome you. Let's start with Bruchot Torah, Caroline, and then we'll sink our teeth into this very interesting sugya.
Sorry, 1 second.
Ata. Asher Kedishanu Mitzvosah V'Tzivanu La'asok B'Divrei Torah. All right. Good morning. All right, Varevna, may these words be sweet. We need Davka for them to be sweet because they're a little bit mar, a little bit bitter. Some bitter Torah this morning. We'll see where we go. This is known, chapter 21 of the book of Dvarim. Dvarim is, in this week's Torah portion in particular, there are a lot of things that are beautiful and progressive, and almost all of it's progressive, let's put it this way, by the standards of the Bronze Age. So why don't we say that off the bat? Like almost everything in the Torah is in some way, shape, or form taking an existent moral mores or value and trying to upgrade it slightly. You'll see in a moment that we're going to compare this morning this piece of Torah and look at the way the rabbis dealt with it and the way that Josephus dealt with it. And this is one of those examples of an upgrade, but it's not nearly at the level that we'd like it to be upgraded to. This is called the sugya of the Ben Sorah or Moreh. Ben Sorah or Moreh. You'll see in a moment where that comes from. All right, everybody with me? Caroline, are you sharing? Did you share? Do you have
I can share.
Awesome. Okay. And by the way, just so you know, this source sheet was, there was a glitch, of course, in Mercury retrograde, that's where we start, there was a glitch on Sefaria. This was much smaller font, it was also numbered, but it's just, it wasn't playing well this week, so I apologize. The original source online has all of those additions that are really important. Okay. Kiyel ish ben Sorah umoreh. The man has a ben, and reading very carefully each of these words. if there is if a man, Kiel Isha, it doesn't say Kiel Ish, okay, if an Ish has a ben, a son who's sorer umoreh. We'll see in a moment that that phrase, those two words are also ambiguous, but let's generally, for the moment, just rely upon our translation, the wayward and defiant.
Oh my God.
What?
It would have stoned me for sure.
We didn't get there yet. You're reading ahead.
Reading it for the first time, she's in a state of shock.
Oh my God. Welcome to the
world
Torah.
of Torah.
The world of Torah. Nice to meet you. Einenu shomea b'kol aviv, does not listen to the voice of his father, uvekol imo, or to the voice of his mother. Also, that's interesting, right?
That's really
V'yisru also, and they have. It's also not really a clear word. It could mean a lot of different things, but let's just generally say disciplined him, right? They disciplined him, made him to suffer. Also, there could be, in other words, but something. There's an action. There's a verb, right? They did something. We're a highly sensitive person, like an HSP. It's like everything. It's like my hair goes like it. Lo yishma alehem. And the second time the word lishma, right? He's not listening is the general category, and then even after being disciplined or whatever that word means, right? V'lo yishma alehem. He's not being listened to, right? Not being obeyed. This word here, to listen, in the Bible, there's no word for obedience. It's to listen. Shema doesn't only mean listen, it means to be obedient. V'ayayim sho'on tishma'u is not listening per se, it's being obedient. It's also a fascinating thing. There's no Hebrew word for obedience. It's just lishmoa, really, in the biblical terminology. Okay. What happens? Let's move into verse 19. V'tafsuo vo aviv imo. Again, mom and dad are in on this together, right? Together. Hotzio so el ziknei iro ve'el shar mikomo. They take him out to the elders of the city and to the gates of their place, meaning the public square. The shar mikomo is the makom is the public square. Verse 20. The amru al ziknei iro v'neinu zeh, they say to the elders of the city, and there's a proclamation. Is it like in whisper? Is it in a duplicate form? Is it a video? What is it? But we say something. B'neinu zeh, this son of ours, sorer umoreh, he is a sorer umoreh. He's defiant and he's wayward. Einenu shomeh b'kolenu, is not listening to our voices, our voice, one voice, or our voice. And then they add this little little shtuchs. He's also zolel v'soveh. He's a glutton and he's also a drunken, a shaken. He's a chazer and he's a shaken. So this is nish good. Nish azoygit, this is not a good thing. And by the way, it's also fascinating because they added after, seems like the Suremor part we know, he's not listening to us, we know, but then they decide to add this, like why, it's like the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that when there's an image of the future when people are going to go into a sukkah and they're going to leave it because, and then they'll give it a kick when they leave it, like it's a little kick. What? Okay. It's fascinating that they added that. So now, and it almost seems fascinating to the point where it seems like, is that a condition of being defined as a wayward? Is like if you're a wayward child but you're not a zolel v'soveh, like it's added here in a legal text as descriptor, as prerequisite, as definitional. What's? Okay, verse 21. Urgamu kol anshe iro ba'avanim. Now the chasm between verse 20 and 21, you don't see it, but it's like, what? Okay, stone him. Urgamu kol anshe iro ba'avanim. All the people of the city, not the elders, all the people, kol anshe iro, stone him with rocks, vames, until he dies. And then this phrase, uvi'arta hara mikirbecha, so that there is a burning out, a sweeping out. The air is also or chametz, like you get rid of the evil that is in your midst, from within your midst, Bikir Becha. And then these last 4 words, like it seems there's connection here between this punishment and this next clause, that all of Israel might see, and now here must also, by the way, it's interesting, is it hearing or obedience? But so all of Israel might be afraid and be obedient. It's probably will hear and be afraid is not, I don't think it's hearing here. I think it's that everybody might be in line, right? That through fear, this becomes a bit. Okay, so thank you for coming, and that's what we're gonna. What's going on here? Okay, so let's just I threw in a couple of questions here, and there is there's a lot of questions here. Probably for most of us, question number 7 is the most relevant. Right? Isn't the law too harsh? Because we're not like in hermeneutical or like interpretive or exegetical mode here. We're not like, okay, what's the Torah mean? Where does this show up? But we're all probably still in shock that this is a part of our sacred tradition, right? Alina's like, yeah. Alina, you've been here for 10 years. More. You've been here more than 10 years.
I know, they would have killed me.
Okay, so what kind of, the punishment doesn't seem to fit the crime. What is the crime? What's the crime? What exactly is happening here? What is the text more broadly trying to address within Israelite or any particular culture or society? What is it useful? Is it, we can, like the bigger questions, is the punishment for the crime? Is the punishment, even if it doesn't fit the crime, it doesn't actually succeed? Is it a successful strategic approach towards having all of Israel be obedient or not? I mean, there's clearly a question of deterrence here. In the micro questions is it only about sons? Is it about daughters? What does it mean to discipline a child? What came before this parsha and what comes after it? Are those things interesting, called juxtaposition? The rules of juxtaposition we call smichut parshiot. All of these are questions, but let's look at something that is written in a different mode by a very different person living in the 1st century. His name was Flavius Josephus. Josephus was not only a historian who, towards the latter part of his life, the last 10 years of his life, wrote an extensive history of the Jews, but someone who lived through the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 of the Common Era, and who, by the end of his life, had completely become a Roman. But who was writing for a different audience. He was writing in his books and also trying to bring Torah into the audience of the Roman Empire. And he certainly puts forward the story of the Ben Sora, but he makes it has significant differences between his rewrite and the Torah's right. And so let's look at that, and then we'll come back to some of these questions and see if he answers some of them for us. And let's see the way the rabbis look at it. Okay? Is that a good menu? Okay, Josephus' rewrite. By the way, this piece of bringing Josephus in is from an amazing website that Rabbi Koresis turned me on to a couple of, I think it was last year, or Torah.com. Really beautiful, academic, rabbinic. This particular article was written by an Israeli academic. And I loved it. When I read it, I thought, okay, this is interesting to me. Hope it is to you. So let's look at this. So this is Josephus' rewrite of these laws, Alina Bloomgarden, of the laws of the rebellious child, okay? In cases in which young people disdain their parents and do not grant them their honor, whether because of shame or lack of understanding, demeaning them. All right, already there's a gloss on the left side, so people follow along in the gloss too. So not listening to the parents here is already defined as disdain and dishonor, right? Disdain and dishonor. Demeaning them. Let the parents, first of all, warn them with words, for they are autonomous judges over their sons, saying that they came together with each other, not for the sake of pleasure, nor for increasing their wealth by placing in common what the two of them had, but in order that they might have children who would tend them in their old age, and who would have from them whatever they needed. Okay, so Josephus here adds a number of things for the audience that he's speaking to. What does he add? Anybody?
Meaning of parenting and marriage.
All of a sudden, we're in the meaning of parenting, okay?
The other thing I would really emphasize, and I think it goes to the heart of the matter, is the chief virtue of civic Roman life was honor and not compassion. And one of the versions I've heard of what Christianity is from Martin Nussbaum, the theorist of the classical world, is basically the distortion of Judaism in order to become the Roman state religion, in order to place this virtue of compassion into this system of power that was primarily about honor. And we think of Rome as being like us, but it really wasn't. It didn't have like it was the stoic suffering is the highest virtue, and the honor of that was the highest virtue. So this whole thing of doing others, not Roman. So the fact that the word honor goes in there as the primary adjective is like everything about this.
Everything about this, but also, of course, in Jewish life, there's also the word honor appears distinctly and uniquely in the role of parents, right? So he's playing off of both of those audiences, right? As a Jew, there's a bridge here between the word kavod, so like there's a notion that in Jewish tradition that like to dishonor your parents is to dishonor God, and so certainly it lines up with the Roman the deep sense that dishonor is almost a capital offense, right? Certainly a capital offense. And so it doesn't say here in our text in the Torah, it doesn't say the word kavod, it says v'lo yishma alehem. It's implicit that kavod would mean listening to your parents or honoring, right? Listening to parents would be a kind of honor, and not listening to them would be a lack of honor. That's not obviously given in the Torah. So when Josephus goes to translate this into an audience, one of his, again, Josephus is also, just like us, right? Alina comes in, she's like, would I bring a friend to learn this kind of Torah? You might think, well, if I want them to love Judaism, I might not bring them to this class because it might turn them off. Josephus, as any apologist, and he was deeply an apologist in some sense, or even a proselytizer or whatever, he's a Roman, but he's also aware that he's a Jew. He's trying to take the Torah and make, he wants to put into the public space. And how does he explain something that at prima facie, like right at face value, you might think, I don't know if this is something I would want to show my Roman family, my Roman friends, my Roman, but by focusing on honor and by saying they are being demeaned, right? Now, just for a moment, I want to back up and say that the ultimate Judaism is rooted in a rebellious son. Judaism began with a rebellious son. Abraham is a rebellious son. Einenu shomeh b'kol aviv, davka.
Adam is a rebellious son.
Adam is rebellious with God as parent, right? As God as parent. But Judaism doesn't exist because of Abraham and his rebellion. We have Judaism because of Isaac and his non-rebellion. And the Torah plays with that truth, right? The truth of that. To some extent, a tradition like Judaism can't begin unless you have a completely iconoclastic rebel, like all innovators, all founders. And there is no continuity and sustainability to that innovation if the second generation is not interested. Right? If they mimic it's a wild thing. You want them to mimic Abraham and be iconic, do your own thing. No, that won't work. Starbucks knew that unless they had a second store, Lahavdil, there would never be a third store. And there would never be a Jacob without an Isaac. And even when Isaac wanted to leave the land, God said, no, gur ba'aretz. Isaac, you can't leave the land. Everybody else can leave the land because, Jacob is already a different story. But you, Isaac, you have to stay, right? You have to stay and dig and redig the wells of your father. And there's a tension in the Jewish thought between being a rebel and an innovator on the one hand, and being a follower and someone who is who listens, right? The whole Torah begins with Abraham not listening to his father, but by the end, by Deuteronomy, if you're not listening to your parents, you endanger the future, right? And so Josephus also is playing, I think, in some way with this. He's trying to make the Torah to some extent, and he goes into the meaning of parenthood. Who is he talking to? It's like wild, like as if he had this little coda, right? The parents warn the child with words. That's what the word v'yisru means, that they discipline him. The discipline in the Torah, v'yisru, is words, right? And they also say, he also adds this phrase, for they are autonomous judges over their children, their sons. Did you catch that?
I did.
What do you think, Alan?
I think that he's trying to explain why there was no trial.
But there is a trial.
Well, it's whatever the parents say is the punishment. I mean, either he was or he wasn't rebellious, either he did or did not listen, and that's it. There is no trial.
Just so you know, though, that in ancient Rome, you didn't, because this statement is essentially saying that parents could do with their children what they wanted. They they were the autonomous judges. He's distinguishing between Roman law and the Torah law. It seems in the Torah that you can't just go into your backyard and just do whatever you want to your child. You have
All
to
you have to
take
do
them
is
into
announce it. All you have to-
the public space. You have to bring them to the elders of the city. Why do you bring the elders of the city? Why not just take care of it yourself?
For deterrence.
Well, then why do it with the Ziknei Yiro? Just do it for Shar Mekomo.
That's not public, and that's not gonna deter people if it's not public. And whatever they declare is the verdict.
I think in both cases, the parents are completely off the hook, which is so interesting.
In both cases, the parents are off the hook.
Josephus and the Torah.
Yeah, the Torah's not going to blame the parents for disobedience.
It's the total opposite of our society. There's something wrong with my
2000
kid.
yeah, 2,000 years
and
ago.
I blame it on myself immediately.
Right.
I don't say sorry or moret.
Right.
I say, oh my God, what did I do?
Well, after 2,000 years, I mean, there were a lot of.
2,000 years. They did the job of the parents.
I know, but like 1,000, but like, but we all know that as late as the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, Alice Miller and others did a tremendous amount of research on parenting manuals. We've talked about this at the shul, like parenting manuals, especially in Christian thought. Children already were defined from the beginning. That was part of the original sin. Even if you didn't believe in original sin, most of Christian, and you can see your early ancient world basically blamed children for having innate rebelliousness, defiance. It wasn't until much later on that we understood that children individually through defiance. Rebellion is oppositional bonding, as one person called it. Like you bond with your parents through egoic. But like clearly, right, it's not, you're off the hook, right? So it's amazing to see the text. It's like really, it's
And
like
the Torah provides for
Yeah.
shoftim, and
Right.
and there's no use of that.
no use of shoftim. Although again, I want to hold out the possibility that being taken to the elders and to the shar
Standard.
is like because shoftim v'shotim diktena b'chol sha'arecha. That's what it said last week. B'chol sha'arecha, sha'ar mekomo. It doesn't say what happens at Shar Mekomo, but Sha'ar is, I think, a stand-in. The gate of the city is a stand-in for where legal action is. Shoftim b'shoftim b'chol sha'arecha. So it's, all right, so let's just do a little bit more of Josephus and see if we see some of the more contrast. Yeah. Wendy.
Not only is there no shoftim, there's no edim, there's no witnesses. So when you're bringing this poor kid forward and you're relying on jaded witnesses, his mother and father.
Right.
There's nobody else that says, I have witnessed him do X, Y, and Z. It's only the mother and father, and everywhere else in the Torah and in the Talmud, you need witnesses. And in this place, there's no judge and there's no witnesses.
Well, let's hold Wendy's good point in where it is, like that there is true that there's something lacking here. We'll see when the rabbis deal with that. It's not true that all the cases in the Torah where there are punishments, capital punishments, that the Torah says there should be witnesses there. So there's a glaring ethical gap between both the events here, the crime, the punishment, and it's the insurance or assurance of just process and due process. So those questions are clearly not in the Torah's worldview, right? The Torah's worldview about witnesses is in other places. Al pi shnei edim yakum davar. There are places there where edim are required, but you'll see that the rabbis, of course, were bothered by this. I mean, Josephus is bothered by it. That's why he's shifting it. And interpretation in the oral tradition, we'll see, will address some of these things, and to try to make sense of what seems to be a very harsh and difficult piece of Torah. So let's just see where Josephus goes now.
Hey, I hate to interrupt, but Beth has been patiently raising her hand for a very long time, so.
Well, can I ask you, I don't know what happened to the
Can't see them.
the screen? I can't see anything on the screen. If you could can you move the window into full screen view?
That would be on your guys' end to change it, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And as we get.
So just so I can explain, I can't see the chat area where the hands are, so it's, thanks for your patience, everybody, we're getting used to it here, okay? Okay, go ahead.
We need to go to view. So we
No,
can see.
but you can also just let her speak, Caroline, and we'll fix it over here.
Go, okay.
There she is.
There you go.
Diane, can you pull over just schlep over
Slips over.
that thing right there? A little lower.
Wait, Mike, there's two cursors right now.
Yeah, it's because the screen is sharing. It's very confusing.
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's upside down.
Beth, you want to just go? Beth, can you hear us? Thank you. Go ahead, Beth.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Hi, both. I had one quick comment with regard to wayward. Back in Shemot, when Moshe observes the burning bush,
Absolutely.
his curiosity and he turns aside, it's the same verb.
Yeah, we'll get there. Beautiful. Beautiful. So, no, finish your sentence.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that this child who's supposedly misbehaving, I guess I wonder, how do you know how much of the behavior is rebellion, like I'm not doing what my parents say, and how much of it is engaging in curiosity and observation and the kid broadening the kid's horizons and finding out what is stimulating and interesting to each individual child. DeBarty.
Shamati, I'm holding off. I need about 10 more minutes until we move through Josephus and some of the rabbinic texts to arrive at some of the questions that compare this text to something that we might understand in this moment, psychologically, kind of like the wisdom of where we are psychologically. The word sar, again, you said it already, the word sar min haderech is used in the Moses story with the theophany of the burning bush at the sneh, where Moshe, asura na ve'er'eh is what Moshe says, asura na. Sar is to leave the path. There it's used as curiosity. Thankfully, he left the path to find that divine miracle. But in other places in the Torah, it's, sar min haderech, God says to the people, they came out and sar min haderech, they moved away from the path that I've given them. And Moshe uses it in that context too. So here it likely means someone who is not, is not keeping Torah, is not obedient to the laws of Torah or the ways of the ancestors. And rebellion clearly in the Torah is not, free to be you and me. It's like, free to be you and me is not the Torah's ethic of, right, hey, I was religious, you do your own thing. This is like, before Shalom Aleichem wrote Fiddler on the Roof by a couple thousand years. And the Torah is definitely not fans of people who do their own thing and let it all hang out. So let's just look here. When you were born, Josephus writes, this is what the parents are supposed to speak to the child. We raised you with joy and giving the greatest thanks to God. We reared you. You can hear him backpedaling here, right? He's trying to undergird a more rational reason why a parent might be, what's the footing on which a parent might give this kind of rebuke to a child, right? It's rooted in, we raised you with joy and giving you the greatest thanks to God. We reared you with devotion, sparing nothing of what seemed to be useful for your well-being and education. This is very much out of out of a Philip Roth novel, right? It's like, your mother and I, we raised you and sent you to the best schools. We spared nothing in your education. Your father worked his butt off just to put you through. Now, however, for it was necessary to grant pardon to the failings of youth, you have sufficiently disregarded the honor, thank you, honor, Thomas, toward us. Change to the more reasonable way, considering that God is also annoyed with those who commit an outrage against parents. Ooh, that's a thick,
That's an assumption.
that's a heavy, well, that's their assertion.
Yeah.
And their assumptions became assertions. And again, because God himself is also the father of the whole human race. He thinks that there's dishonor at the same time for those who have the same title as God's self when they do not obtain from their children what is fitting for them. And there is the implacable law, the punisher of such acts, which you should not put to the test. Wow. You are going to get a whipping. Horrible, right? Oh, and it's rooted in kind of this extension. Parents are like God, by the way. That's a Jewish, that's a rabbinic, right? At Aviv Tirav, right? Mitzvotav Shmor, like you have to have fear and love of God. That is also the fear and love of the parents. Parents are like deities, but not just that. We've been good deities to you. Be careful, right? Be careful. Now, if the rebelliousness of the youth is cured by such means, let them be excused from the censurers for things they did not know. For thus the lawgiver would be good, and the parents fortunate in seeing neither son nor daughter punished. Right? If that speech works, great. The Yisroto, they disciplined him. And by the way, here it says son and daughter, not son alone, son and daughter. All children, that makes sense. However, should these words and the teaching from them about moderate behavior seem worthless, and should one make the law's implacable enemies for himself through such constant boldness towards one's parents, let them be brought forward by them themselves outside the city with the masses following, and let them be stoned. Josephus mentions nothing about elders or trial of any sort. So again, in this academic's reading, Alan, that this coming to the gate is exactly as you said for public, but there are no elders. And the elders, at least in this reading, are adjudicators of what is just and what is not, and it's not up to the parents. Here it is up to the parents. So in a way, it's both more progressive because it gives all the reasons for this, and also slightly regressive, at least if you see the elders as kind of just, those who are involved in justice, that step here seems to be lacking. And then after remaining during the whole day in the sight of all, let them be buried at night. Thus let those who in any way would ever have been condemned by the laws be put to death. But let even the enemy be buried. Let not even one corpse lie without a share in the earth, paying a penalty beyond what is just. Okay. Now, that last piece is back to the law of juxtaposition. That in the Torah, this section of the Torah about the rebellious son comes immediately before the laws governing how one is to treat a corpse that has been, someone who's died through punishment, capital punishment. The Torah says even if it's a criminal, the criminal has to be treated with respect in death, and the body can't be remain outside. Ki kilat alim kol talut, like the person still has dignity after they have been punished, and so that's the way Josephus makes sense of this law and why it's placed here before that law. There is another way of looking at this. If you look at the next source from Rashi, now we're moving into the rabbinic source. Rashi understands the question of why the rebellious son is in the Torah where it is by reminding us that the rebellious son is in a series of texts that come one after another that Rashi and the rabbis read as a kind of causal chain. And it begins with the beginning of the Torah portion where a person is allowed to take an Eshes Yifat Torah, that if you're in war and you see a beautiful woman amongst the captives, the Torah gives you permission to marry her. And so how does Rashi understand what will happen? Here's what Rashi says. You see where we are? Scripture is speaking, making this concession only in view of man's evil inclination, right? Our carnal desires. But if the Holy One, the Blessed Holy One would not permit her to him as a wife, he would nevertheless marry her, although she would then be forbidden to him. It's a radical rabbinic text. The Torah said, this is Rashi's reading of the permission given in the Torah at the beginning of this Torah portion to marry someone in a way that is not ideal by any stretch. But because the Torah assumes that this is what Rashi says, because God knows that if you were in war, you would do this anyway, the Torah makes a concession. In other words, the Torah is trying to speak to the reality, not to the ideal. The idealia, the realia, not the idealia. Like in the real world, if the Torah would say you are not allowed to, in war, you would still do unethical things. So the Torah tries to make ethical that which is probably not ethical, tries to make it slightly more progressive. Now that becomes another class. We can talk about that all, like the Torah is Dibra V'Lashon B'nei Adam. There are so many things in the Torah that in the rabbinic rubric are not ideal, but a progressive incrementalist view of how do we get there? Meet people where they are. The Torah meets the soldiers or that mentality of war where it is and doesn't command something that would be impossible to enact. And so then Rashi goes on to quote the rabbis in the Tanchuma who say that concession though leads to all kinds of horrible things, says the rabbis. That from there, v'sofo aval im nis'a sofo liot son'ah. He says that the next part of the Torah, which deals with the hated wife, right? There's a next part of the Torah talks about if you have two wives and one of them is ahuva, and one is snua, one is loved and one is not loved. The Torah, the rabbis make a claim that like unwanted wife comes about because you married someone under this kind of conditions. It's not ideal. You married her under duress. It was a lust marriage. It's not a love marriage. A lust marriage is not a love marriage. This is a very complicated sugya. But in the end, this source essentially says that, the way Josephus just said that the reason why the Torah put this rebellious son before the parsha dealing with burying the dead who are criminals is, right, that's why it's there. And here, in the rabbi's minds, the rebellious son comes about because of a marriage that was not ideal, right? A marriage that is rooted not in love and self-respect, but in other words, and I think this is a close reading. It can bother you, it bothers me, but here's what I think it's a close reading on. Is not listening to the voice of the mother and the voice of the father. The Torah goes out of its way to say that each one has a voice. And then it says each one, then when they come to the court, they say, this child is not listening to our one voice. And there's something about the parents here seem to be one unit in this portion. They're together. He's not listening to our voice. And so the rabbis are trying in their kind of proto-psychological, like what might be why is this portion here? And are there any rimazim, any kind of hints, allusions in the text that might lead to parents who don't speak as one voice, parents who don't, show up in quite the same way? And in some way, it's also now, by the way, coming back to Rabbi Kolares's point from earlier, even though the child seems to be here clearly the source of the problem, this rabbinic text doesn't source it in the child. This rabbinic text says that if you want to know why there's a rebellious child, look at the parents and the context in which they got married, which is kind of a proto where we are today. Like, oh, it's not about the child, but like, what are the antecedent causes? What's the environment? What, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Good morning.
So I'm noticing in the first Torah text that it's referring to the child being a glutton and a drunkard, right, which indicates to me that this is a grown child, and perhaps you alluded to this before. So I think and this is before the notion of adolescence, right, which is a very recent development. So like you have this bright line between a child status and an adult status. But I think there's also some some potential for ambiguity here because you always remain a child even as an adult. So, and you still continue to have parents even as an adult, and this seems to be referring to that situation, which seems sort of unusual, where you're talking about a child who is not in childhood. You're talking about an adult grown child. And so, but that state of affairs continues even unto further generations and further generations. So is this meant to suggest that if the child becomes a glutton and a drunkard at age 60, and then, you know, are their parents still allowed to do this and say, aha, like this is always hanging over you? So I feel like there's this question in my mind, similarly, like now we think about like its childhood extends further and further into adulthood. So it's kind of the opposite move, right? So now like this human development has sort of slowed in a way, like in the time at which people are held responsible as adults is more and more delayed. But to me, I feel like this is kind of the opposite move. I'm curious what we are to make of that.
So all of this is so look, just to take the rabbit out of the bag, the rabbis. So the rabbis are going to have to do to this text what Josephus did to the text, but for very different reasons. The rabbis who are living, right, the rabbinic period extends past Josephus into right, between the 2nd century, the 3rd century, all the way up to the 9th, let's say the 8th century in Babylonia and also in Palestine. The rabbis of the Mishnaic period and the rabbis of the Talmud are going to have to make sense of this text in light of not like being polemicists for the sake of, you know, acceptance and assimilation in Roman culture. They have to become polemicists, or otherwise they have to use rabbinical methods to come up against a burgeoning ethical and moral sensibility, right? So the rabbis are going to be bothered by all of these questions. Who is the Ben Sorah? What age is they? The rabbis are going to say basically that when do you become a Ben Sorah? Only when you start to have pubic hair is when you become, eligible. Right? We're not talking about a child who's, oppositional bonding at 2, 3, 4, which is talking about a child who comes of age. Now we know that, of course, that's also problematic, and they're not done with their heretical rereading of this text. The rabbis, and just to, fast forward because we don't have enough time, the rabbis are going to actually say a number of things about who this child is. And the biggest problem for the rabbis is this text is problematic on a million levels, but the biggest problem bothering them is how are you judging a child? How is the punishment fit the crime, right? How does killing a rebellious child, right, work? It doesn't seem from the text they've done anything that warrants capital punishment. There's no prior law in the text that says if someone is a rebellious person. The text of the Torah always says if you are a rebel, you can ask for forgiveness. Right? At what point did the rabbis are wondering, how does this text make sense given other intertextual clues within Deuteronomy and other places that say, Moshe Rabbeinu prays for the Jewish people and says, God, don't destroy them just because they rebelled with the golden calf. They weren't, right? They were able to do, not all of them, but they were able to do tshuva. So rabbis are up against an ethical and moral problem of human behaviors, the seeming intractability the text seems to be defining a sinner as someone who will always be a sinner. And so the rabbis then formulate something I can show you inside. It essentially says that if you want to look at the source, it is this is nothing like that. Okay. It's right. I'm going to just tell you where it is. It's the next source. It was the next source after. Oh, I'm sorry. It's where it says Sanhedrin 68b-4. I'm so sorry. It's right above. It's above where it says Mishnah Sanhedrin 8.5. Wow, Caroline, you're good. Okay, great. The Talmud says, the Gemara says, Anan hachika amrinan. This is what we are saying. Atu ben sorer more al cheto nerag. Is a rebellious son killed for a sin that they already committed? You can hear in this question already hundreds of years, over 1,000 years after this text has been written, a burgeoning sense that it can't be there's nothing in the text that indicates that there's a sin that would qualify for capital punishment.
Right.
So what do the rabbis say? And this doesn't help us that much, but it helps us a little bit. They say, it's not that he's being killed for what he did, he's being killed for what he will do. Wow, okay. It's preventative, it's preemptive. Now, by the way, this puts us in a completely different, abstract, but very interesting philosophical conundrum. Like, if you could know that Hitler, Yahya Sinwar was one of the 1,400 or so, over 1,200, how many, 1,400 terrorists, murderers who were released for Gilad Shalit. We saved his life, we removed his brain tumor, and he went back and he murdered 1,200 Jews. Like again, the assumption that we have knowledge of the future is also problematic, right? That's the problem here and makes it even worse. But in theory, if knowledge could be absolute, then they solve the problem, right? If you could make an absolute beeline from a sociopathic child, God forbid, right? And there are such cases, right, where there's sociopathy and psychopathy are also visible at a very young age. I'm not advocating, God forbid, for capital punishment. I'm just trying to understand the abstract rabbinic move, because the move here is the first of a series of moves that will eventually remove Ben Sorer from the category of the possible. The rabbis begin to tear down this law from the Torah by first saying that there's no way the Torah is speaking about a child in the present moment. The Torah is not indicating behavior that is punishable by capital punishment, and that's because the Torah is talking about what will happen. So first they got out of the problem of the crime and the punishment not being aligned. Now they've moved the problem to the crime that has not yet happened is the problem. So of course, right, it's still a huge problem, right? So, but the Torah seems to be speaking about justice preemptively. What do we do in a world where we are ultimately responsible not just for the present moment of the child, but making sure that the child in the future does not become a child who is a criminal? Now, again, punishment is extreme, and again, we're on the way to completely removing this law. The rabbis are the ultimate rebels, which is the irony of the whole thing. The rabbis don't listen to their father and mother in heaven, and they themselves become the B'nai Sorer, or the rabbis are themselves the great right, rebels of the Torah. They undo the Torah for the sake of the Torah, and for the sake of ethics and morality. What Moshe Halbertal wrote a book about this, Ma'apechot Musariot, Tanakh. This is one of the great examples of rabbinic agency in evolving mores of what is ethical and moral. But it begins a conversation about, like, what happened in Georgia just 3 weeks ago.
Right.
The criminal justice system now is punishing the parents. Is that a deterrent? They hope so. Is it justice? Are they guilty of manslaughter? In some cases, But isn't a remarkable moment? You have a Ben Sorer Moreh, you have a child who's, and our own culpability as a culture in our society, like to say, like, B'neinu zeh, Sorer, this is our child, is a rebellious child. What's our responsibility is kind of in this. Now, just to underscore what I think is a horrible theology, just again on a morning to shock, look at the next source. The Mishnah says, why is a Ben Sorer Omer guilty of death? Why does he have to why do you have to die at this moment? Because at least at this moment he's still innocent. It's very next source. You just wherever you just were, go right next door. Ben Sorer Omer nidon al shem sofo yamut zakai v'al yamut chayav shemitatan shel rishayim hana'a lehem v'hana'a la'olam latzadikim ra lehem v'ra le'olam. This is like, I remember reading this as a kid and I was like, it's better to kill somebody while they're still not yet an infidel. It doesn't get better, right?
Bad to worse.
Okay. Okay. So let's go to the last source. It's Rabbi Sachs, and then we'll open it up. Yeah. Last source, very last source. Go till you can't go no more. The Torah foresaw the ultimate destiny of stubborn and rebellious son. Having dissipated his father's wealth, this is from the rabbinic text, all of them trying to figure out what the child did wrong. This is, he's dissipated his father's wealth. He would seek to satisfy his wants and be unable to do so. He would then go to a crossroad and rob. Therefore, the Torah ordained, let him die innocent rather than die guilty. For the death of the wicked benefits both themselves and the world. On this view, the law of the stubborn and rebellious son is a form of preemptive punishment. He is deemed worthy of punishment not for what he has done, but for what he's likely to do in the future. The equivalent nowadays would be preventative detention. That is to say, putting someone in prison because he or she is judged to be a danger to society. There is a concept in secular law of punishment as deterrence, not just punishment as retribution. That, according to Rabbi Yossi, is the logic of the law. Not only is the child himself sentenced, but the aim is also that all Israel will hear of it and be afraid. In other words, that other potential criminals will be discouraged by seeing the fate of this one. One explanation of the disagreement, I won't go into this, let's stop there. So there is this idea of deterrence. It has been shown to be, for the most part, not true, especially in capital punishment in this country. It does not act as a deterrent. Over and over again, we know that to be the case. But there is also a compassionate perspective, which says that we don't punish people necessarily for their crimes. If you're someone who doesn't believe in free will, Sam Harris, other philosophers, people basically act, one cause leads to an effect, leads to another cause, leads to another effect. There's almost a great chain that begins with some seeds of karma. We punish people not for what they've done, but because in compassionate justice, what they might do based upon what they've done in the past is a responsibility to deter them from being, right, acting in a similar way in the future. Right? We're not punishing you, we're not saying that you had a choice necessarily, but we're not going to make it available for you to do it again, right? And so here, like, in some way, you can imagine the beginnings of a conversation about deterrence or about preventative justice or some such thing is already on the docket. Now, I said that they took it off, the rabbis reread this piece. The rabbis use the tools of the master to undo this piece of this mansion, as it were, of the Torah itself. The rabbis say, when the Torah says that the child is zolel v'soveh, that he's a glutton and he's a chazer, he's a drunkard, there are all kinds of absurd requirements that the rabbis placed on that scenario to make it almost impossible for the child to actually fulfill that requirement. The rabbi said that the only way you would find a wayward child is if the parents and have the exact same voice, literally, same timbre, the same volume. In other words, the rabbis use law and a hypercritical reading of the text to make it almost impossible to ever find a rebellious child. And they actually go so far as to say that there never was a rebellious child. Lo hayav, like there never was. Which leads the rabbis to then ask the question, which is, then why do we have this part of it in the Torah? What's the point of God giving us laws that we could never enact?
Deterrence.
Deterrence. They don't say that. They say dush v'kabel schar. It means just like to learn it. But yeah, deterrence. Maybe to teach us that it's possible for us to reread anything in the Torah, that hermeneutical, like dexterity, is the way that we evolve ancient texts. One of the core pieces of why this never worked out for the rabbis is, I'll tell you this, is the rabbis never believed that you could know what a person would ever become from where they are at this moment. They refused in the battle of values between preventative justice and the higher and deeper Torahitic value, which is human beings can fundamentally change. The latter won out over the former. That the reason why this didn't work was not because they couldn't think of a plausible reality where looking at a child, you could trace their, God forbid a Hitler, God forbid a murderer, God forbid. And they were not inured to that. and they also believed that the Torah maybe was trying to warn us about that danger or try to create a society where that didn't happen. But ultimately, they couldn't abandon the truth that they believed in, which is that tshuva is always possible. And that's why we read it, right, this time of the year, is that no matter how rebellious you've been, right, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are coming up and we don't give up on you, right? That's ultimately their unwillingness to actually take this text to where it goes, and their own heretical, rebellious interpretive methodology led them to try to redeem the Torah by saying, shh, we got it, right? People can change. Children can change. Societies can change. And that's ultimately, right, I think why we read it this time of the year. Okay, thoughts, questions, frustrations, anger, rip it up. Go ahead, yeah.
In any particular moment, that theory comes up against reality. I immediately thought of Spinoza, for instance,
Wow.
because
That's a nice thing to immediately think of, is you think of Spinoza.
permanently expelled from his community.
Right,
But
he's a
in
heretic, right.
the context of the time,
Right.
a community coming, suddenly being able to establish a Jewish community, when that community had been hidden previously. And, to the extent that they had to bring rabbis from elsewhere to help them learn how to be Jewish. Okay.
Right,
And so they have that memory.
right,
And then in addition, now they're in a new community and they're tolerated, but they have they know what can happen to them. So this is the way I've always seen the Spinoza issue, this radical, an expulsion that is permanent.
right,
I always thought of it as a threatened community.
yeah.
And his ideas were rather radical. They don't seem radical to us now, perhaps, but at the time, wouldn't that have been a threat to
Yeah.
the community?
Right, so I love that, because you went in a direction that I didn't go, that I think is exactly a great direction, which is, this is also a conversation about like lines and borders and where people are, like, I think a lot of us would agree that if a person during the middle of COVID was rebelling against the norms and saying that not that, an anti-vaxxer, like a lot of us would be like, well, should we talk to them compassionately, or if they are publicly influencing people not to get vaccines, they're kind of a ben soror moret, and then is not listening to the authorities and is undermining the trust of the community at a moment of great peril. Right? A lot of us, again, I don't know where people are with vaccine, not vaccine, but you can fill in the blank. There are a lot of examples of this where communal norms are being flaunted and flouted, and a public display of disregard, right, is met with opprobrium, or met with not stones, but let's say the proverbial metaphorical stones, like this person is publicly like shamed or publicly put in their place in order to deter others. Now, is that so far-fetched? Again, let's reduce the crime here and start talking about like a problem that must be dealt with in a certain way. And I spoke last night in my sermon about somebody that I think over the last 11 months is someone that's kind of on the other side of this, of my personal opinion about what's going on in Israel. And I find his viewpoints to be extremely, extremely naive and dangerously so. But he and I were in an intimate setting at a bar mitzvah, and I sat with him with a group of other people, and we had a great conversation. I found him to be, again, I still disagree with him and think that his public declarations are really, but like, is he beyond the pale? I don't know. Like, I think these are questions that all of us have been struggling with this year for the last, ever since, as far as I know, it's a forever question, but Trump, right, has made this kind of, the way that we use the public voice, the ways that we rebel, the ways that we undermine norms and authorities and trust, has really deleterious and dangerous impacts on the collective. And how we deal with that, Spinoza suffered immensely from his excommunication.
And yet, knowing the context, we might have a little more
Compassion for the community, right. Right, here in the liberal world, we're like, especially because as liberal Jews, we're often seen as heretics too, in some way, kind of grandchildren of Spinoza. I remember there was like a trial of Spinoza over at Stryker Center, did like a mock trial of Spinoza to give him a voice. But, maybe the communal norms in this text are, that's denuded of its capital element and the crime and the punishment, but like a sympathy towards the community trying to maintain its its structure in some way.
Survival.
It's survival, right? It's future. Yeah, it's great. Rabbi Claressis, and then
So just to pull out a thread that you introduced before, how many times the word shomea is in this passage, right? He doesn't listen, he doesn't listen, he doesn't listen. And then the fact that all Israel is listening, it feels to me like he can't hear, right, the central or the essential principle of the Torah, which is to listen, as encoded in the Shema. And so he represents what is unassimilable to the society.
Yeah.
It's kind of what you're saying, right? What can they not assimilate, right? It's like, and then the rabbis, through kind of assimilating who he is, show like a greater range of, permeable borders and porousness.
yeah,
So, but I understand here, like, who can't hear the Shema? Who can't hear and attest a society, and maybe maybe a society is stronger the more they can assimilate. And maybe not, I don't know.
I think you hit it. It's like beautiful that you brought that. The Shema, the whole Talmud is underscored by the word tashma, like come and listen. And the rabbis were trying to assimilate a lot, and their own burgeoning sense of what their own power was to be able to fight with the Torah, and albeit under the agency of, we were given this to fight with, lo b'shamayim.
But they fought through listening.
They listened,
right?
yeah.
They got that.
Yeah, they got it. I think is a core question of individual, collective, individual within a family, individual within a society, right? And how we assimilate how radically strong we are, and what can be and what can't be, like what needs to be on the outside. Because there's no group without an outside, right? There's no world without an outside. It just depends where you draw that line, right?
And I think the vaccine example was excellent, because what threatens us?
What threatens
and
us.
our coherence.
Right. And what undermines the internal coherence of a given, right, membrane, whatever that membrane is, right? It's really, it's all in this question, right? Okay, can we go online though, because they want to, Jill, and then I can't see.
Richard and Azarheim.
There's Richard, there's Asher Haim, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think maybe this question's already been asked, but so basically the way the rabbis resolve it is by saying that there really is no rebellious child, so you don't have to invoke this kind of terrible thing. And I guess my question is then, how is that really a resolution? Because why would there be advice in the Torah about a rebellious child? So it kind of doesn't resolve it for me. You know what I mean? If there is no such thing as a rebellious child, then you just don't have it in the Torah at all, right?
Yeah, so we spoke about that, but I think it has to be more precise. There are, of course, rebellious children, there's no doubt, and we can all attest to that truth. Or not all of us, but many of us were rebellious children, one of us had rebellious children, whatever it is. Maybe rebellion is the wrong word, maybe strong-willed, individuated. Certainly, this is an example of authority and its transmission and compliance. Right, and compliance is always a question of human will and individual will. And whenever there are individuals with their own will, there will be non-compliance, And so there's no doubt that there are rebellions and there are disagreements. The rabbis essentially didn't say that there are no longer b'nai or children who are rebellious, but the particular case in the Bible that would warrant a capital punishment has never been discovered, right? It never existed, as it were. And whether they knew this consciously, it's hard to believe that they didn't know this consciously, but they were essentially maintaining the truth of this story, that there are children and people and citizens that don't listen, without its catastrophic implications for what it says about human beings' ability to change and to transform, and the moral implications of putting to death people who disagree with the law, right? So they essentially maintained the integrity of this topic without without maintaining the disintegrity of its solution and its resolution, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
in that, we as the inheritors of that tradition are enjoined and commanded and obligated to do a similar thing, is to read the Torah, extract what is beautiful, salient, important, troubling, but not morally problematic, and then evolve the morally troubling pieces in ways that are also consistent with our tradition, if that makes sense. It's like at every level. Yeah, okay, Richard.
Thank you.
Yes, the talking about the rabbis tying the events in the Parsha as into one sequence, the Itzbitzer Rebbe sees the prohibition about hanging the corpse on the gallows as an offense against God. He sees that as relating to the rebellious son. So he says that this is God consoling the father, that of course your son had something good in him, because if he didn't, God would not be concerned about his corpse hanging from all to look at. And then the Itzbitzer relates all the events in the Parsha to get together, that he took the mother was only because of his desire for the good in her, that he hated his son was only hatred for the evil in him. And even the killing of his son was not in vain, for it established the boy's innocence.
Thank you, Richard. So everybody, just as students of Torah, students together, it's really important for us to understand that the very answers that are given often tell us about the questions that were not explicit. So whatever is bothering the Ishbitzer in that particular moment, the answer can let us know what is bothering him. What's bothering him is that there must be good in this child. There's no human being without good. What's bothering him is, why is the Torah telling us to marry, this particular, in this instance? So he's troubled by his own assumption about human nature and about reality. The Torah must be comporting with that, right? So we learn a lot more about him than we do about his Torah, right? The father is being troubled. God's comforting the father is beautiful. That the only reason why he's being buried in a way that's dignified can't be only because he has good in him, but because there's good in everyone, and everybody deserves a dignified, not even if there's good in them, but everybody deserves a dignified burial. But yeah, that's a very classic Chassid. Don't forget the Chassidim were themselves rebels. So everywhere in the Torah where they talk about people who broke the rules, the Chassidim are going to read themselves into it, right? They also were going to be excommunicated the way that they were excommunicated, the way that Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated. So they see themselves as banim that are sorer moreh. They're not listening to the ways of the ancestors. Famous Hasidic stories about one Rebbe from Lulav, David of Lulav, the Lulav Rebbe, whose son succeeded him and began to change all the ways that his father had done things, and the elders were nervous to go approach him, but they chose one guy to go approach him and say, Your Honor, the Rebbe, their father did things for 40 years in a particular way, and now you're doing things in a very different way, and we're very troubled by that. And Noach Lulav said to them, I think you're mistaken. My father and I do things exactly the same way. And they said, but your eminence, it's not true. And he said, my father did things his way, and I do things my way, and we both do things our way. And he said, and that was he was reading this, it's reading from here, like that there's a complete valorizing of rebellion, that it takes great courage to be an innovator and to break away from the stale traditions of the ancestors. One is a holy deviance, and one is a dangerous one, and how to know the two, I don't know. Last comment was, I think that Asher Chaim had his hand up. Yeah. And then Jesse, and then we'll go. Asher Chaim.
Thank you, Rav, for your Torah of how we take a painful text and go through the process of wrestling with it in order to defang it. And I like Jill's question, effectively, what can we learn from a law